Talofa lava, this is Pacific Waves from RNZ Pacific. I'm Susanna Suisuipi. Coming up,
I think it's really important that we continue to put pressure on whoever it is in that position.
the ISA elects its new Secretary General also.
Cultural norms is being used as an excuse to sweep these issues under the carpet, then we have no choice.
Fiji's government is criticised for still not doing enough to tackle human trafficking, and a new report shows more Pacific women are taking up leadership roles in business. The UN body responsible for forming mining rules in the high seas finished its meeting on Friday local time in Kingston, Jamaica. Brazilian oceanographer Leticia Carvalho was voted in as the new Secretary General at the International Seabed Authority meeting, replacing two-term head Michael Lodge, who's been criticised for aligning with seabed mining companies. Caleb Fotheringham spoke with Greenpeace Aotearoa deep-sea mining campaigner Jerisa Lee about the meeting.
This last week was the ISA Assembly, so that's the broader grouping of countries meeting. And that included one of the biggest decisions discussed at the ISA Assembly was the election of the new Secretary General. So Leticia Carvalho is a ocean scientist and had a landslide victory over the current sitting Secretary General Michael Lodge. What difference will that make? Well, Leticia Carvalho is essentially pro-deep-sea mining. Brazil, where Leticia comes from, is pro-deep-sea mining. However, we do hope that with her occupation, her background, that there will be some caution. We are really hoping that any decisions made around deep-sea mining are made with the best available science, and we are hoping that Leticia Carvalho will be really championing that.
In terms of NGOs, environmental NGOs I'm talking about, is Leticia Carvalho the preferred choice out of her and Michael Lodge?
I think it's too early to say. I appreciate that Leticia Carvalho has a background that could be helpful to these discussions, but, I think it's really important that we continue to put pressure on whoever it is in that position and to keep encouraging them, whoever that is, that they must put the health of the oceans and health of the seabed at the heart of the ISA and all of the discussions and all of the decision making.
Another thing that happened during the Assembly meeting was there were more countries joining the call for a moratorium or at least some sort of precautionary pause on deep-sea mining. Tuvalu, they joined the call for that. How are you feeling about this growing list of countries?
I'm feeling very hopeful. I did very much celebrate Tuvalu's decision as well because it is a turnaround on an earlier pro-deep-sea mining. I feel very hopeful, particularly about the growing movement amongst the Pacific and seeing our Pacific civil society really working hard to look after their home. Where for Pacific Island nations and Pacific peoples, the place that they call home is mostly the ocean. So it's just been really warming and inspiring to see Pacific civil society really working hard with their own governments back in their home countries and turning the tide against deep-sea mining.
Are you concerned by the metals company? They have enacted the 2-year rule and told Reuters they plan to apply for a mining licence before the end of the year.
It is a concern to me to hear them make those bold kinds of comments, and all I can really say is that I expect that our world leaders, that world governments, doing what is the right thing to do by us, by civil society, by the health of our planet, and really looking at what is sustainable and what is just and equitable, not just for the state of the planet right now and for people here right now, but for many generations to come. And we have seen what I believe is a little glimpse of that, of governments showing that authority by voting out Michael Lodge, who some would say was an industry mouthpiece and operated outside the scope of his role. And so I feel like we are getting there, and we need to remember that the industry does not have any of those things at the centre of what they're trying to do. They have one thing which they are trying to do, which is make money. And so, going back to the ISA and what should be on the table at ISA, it is putting our ocean and our seabed before profits.
The governor of Guam has defended the use of nuclear weapons and long-range missiles on the territory and says it's needed in order to promote peace in the Pacific region. It's an interesting position considering Pacific leaders are creating a Pacific zone of peace and have treaties which forbid the use of nuclear weapons. Guam's Governor Lou Leon Guerrero is gunning for associate membership at PIF and hopes the other two US territories, Northern Marianas and American Samoa, follow suit. She says their aim is for full membership for all three territories. Alicia Foon is in Guam and spoke with Lou Leon Guerrero about the territory's plans to join the Pacific Islands Forum and asked her to explain the reason behind the military build-up and missile testing.
I came into office 5 years ago. I was visited actually by SPC, and they said, "Hey, Governor, you guys have been members but haven't been, paying." So we said, "Oh yes, we want to continue being members." The whole issue here is that we are Pacific Islander. We're part of the Oceania. And we're more connected to the Pacific Islands than anyone else, right? Or anywhere else. We're more connected because of where we are geographically located. And I think we are the most developed Pacific Islander in the Northern Pacific. I haven't seen much of the South Pacific, so I can't own that. But for the North Pacific, I think everyone is agreeable that we are way ahead, developed in everything, infrastructure, health, education, so forth. And so we feel very, very strongly that we can contribute to helping improve the quality of lives of all of our island brothers and sisters throughout the Oceania, not just North Pacific, but South Pacific also.
Ultimately, what would you like to see in terms of Guam being at the decision-making table?
I want to be a full member of PIF. That's my goal.
And the United States has officially allowed this to happen too?
The United States was not aware of any of this until we started applying for associate membership. A delegation came out here from PIF to do a total assessment, and their report is recommending that we become members. I read the report. Yeah.
The ocean is a really sacred space for Pacific people. So
right.
The leader of Fiji, Seabed Authority, at the last Pacific Islands Forum said, "We want to create the Pacific region as a zone of peace," which is a direct conflict with what is happening with the ramping up of military activity on Guam. So
I don't necessarily agree with that statement, because I'll tell you this.
Would you say the zone of peace?
Guam is the only U.S. soil that was invaded and occupied. And we were not at peace for about 3.5 years. We were in fear for 3.5 years. So we know what it's like to be not at peace. We are a very peaceful people.
When you say invaded, who are you saying invaded?
By the Japanese forces.
Okay.
Yeah, World War II.
Okay.
In World War II. And the U.S. came and liberated us. And as a result, you'll see in the islands that people are very patriotic. But I'll tell you, we're not patriotic where we're just laying flat and say, okay, military, come in and take over our land. No. Yes, after the war, they did that because they had to rebuild the island, right? But they compensated landowners. They worked with the landowners, And they've been here for so long, since 1898, after the Spanish-American War. We are very much for peace. We are very much for peace. Sure. You have to balance out what you are, right?
Would you consider long-range missile testing and the ramping up of military activity, and Guam being one of the largest storage places for nuclear weapons, as peaceful? And is that
I consider that as ways and measures to maintain peace in our island. And I know exactly the challenges of militarization. I know that. I'm very familiar with all of that. But I'll tell you this, right? If they just get up and leave right now, we will be worse off in terms of peace, because I certainly don't want our people to be under Chinese rule. And that is very, very real threat here, Lisha. It is a real threat. I mean, North Korea every other week sends missiles out this way, right? So the bottom line for me as governor is, how do you weigh and balance peace, protection of freedom, democracy, and all of that, right, over here, with the threats of the geopolitics out here? And I certainly believe that it can happen.
From a perspective of the Pacific region, Pacific leaders in New Zealand, they will be looking at Guam, trying to understand what's happening. There's military build-up, and climate change has been the main threat that leaders have talked about. However, they are concerned that the Pacific region is becoming more of a target and a magnet for nuclear warfare. Are you concerned that more missiles and more testing could be a threat to Pacific neighbours in the Pacific region? Could this be the start of, God forbid it, but say World War III?
The start of World War III is going to happen regardless whether there's nuclear attraction or all of that, really, you know. And the comments about this attracts then nuclear, we're already here in Guam because of where we're at. We are an attraction to conflicts. The Spanish, the Japanese, right? Now we're seeing conflicts with China and Taiwan. We're close by to Taiwan. Taiwan is a close ally of ours. We are close allies with the U.S., right? So we are already an attraction.
The head of a civil society organization in Fiji says culture must evolve in order to tackle human trafficking. Speaking at a forum in Suva to mark World Day Against Trafficking, Fiji Council of Social Services Director Vani Ratanasinga criticised the government for not grasping the severity of the issue. Ms. Ratanasinga says while there is some aim to prevent human trafficking, the slow implementation of legislation signals a level of ignorance about how extensive the issue is. Coco Lance asked her what the main challenges were in getting the government to act.
What do you think are the challenges or barriers in actioning this call to the government?
We're saying that government doesn't fully understand the extent of human trafficking in the country. We appreciate that there is some legislation in place to prevent human trafficking. Mm-hmm. What we're saying is some of those laws and policies are not reaching communities where we are seeing cases emerge. That is perhaps signaling the lack of awareness about just how extensive the issue of human trafficking is. We're also saying that there's an interplay between drug trafficking and human trafficking, and it's quite evident in that work that we've done.
So I saw that you mentioned that sometimes cultural norms can create excuses for people to sweep things under the rug. Can you expand on that or explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, I did say that if cultural norms is being used as an excuse to sweep these issues under the carpet, then we have no choice. Culture must evolve. And we're seeing, how sometimes culture can become perhaps a challenge in the effort to eradicate human trafficking. And what I did say is that sometimes some of what is clothed as tradition in our Itaukei culture are simply harmful patriarchal practices designed to preserve the status quo. There's a number of reports, the most recent being the 2023 U.S. State Trafficking in Persons report that corroborates much of what communities are saying with regards to capacity gaps that exist in these agencies. This is mandated through laws to tackle different parts of the issue. And decision makers need to take time to read these reports in order to understand. Leaders find some of what we say incredulous, and it's no wonder because some of these reports are never read. So much of what we say is not taken seriously. But, I want to say that we speak like that as civil society because we know of these issues that happen. I think there are people who make decisions in Suva that don't exactly understand the extent of this problem in rural areas, problems faced by children and women. There are some areas of Fiji, some provinces where women's participation is being encouraged, the structures are being enabled for their active participation. It's been all thanks to some of the work that Song Song of Marama has been doing. That is one of the oldest indigenous women's organizations in Fiji. And so it also speaks to the capacity gaps that is yet to be addressed in the civil service, particularly with those who are supposed to do research, who are supposed to do policy work. And so it speaks to other deeper issues, some level of change that's occurring. And while I sympathize with the leaders who have just come on board 2 years into the job, I sympathize a little bit more with communities who have to deal with these issues on a daily basis. And civil society is here. They are not getting the right information from those who work under them. Then they can come straight to civil society.
Looking forward, do you see hope for change?
Definitely. I think there were great expectations that there will be these sweeping changes, but we've been told to manage our expectations, and we are trying to do that. But when it comes to saving lives, we will not tiptoe around some of these tough issues.
There's a steady increase of women in business leadership roles in the Pacific, but challenges remain. This is according to a new report published by the Asian Development Bank's Pacific Private Sector Development Initiative. The report highlighted that the average proportion of women directors in the Pacific rose from 21% in 2021 to 26% this year. I caught up with Sarah Boxall, the report's author, to discuss the findings.
Certainly. This is the second edition of a report we first did in 2021, and it's looking at the representation of women in business leadership, so senior executive and board director roles across the Pacific. Mainly looking at larger businesses that have independent boards. And this time we added, in addition to the data, we also did interviews with business leaders across the Pacific, as well as surveys with women business leaders to better understand what it was that they were experiencing in their leadership journey.
Before we get into the report and its findings, can you explain the importance of having more women in business leadership, particularly in the Pacific region?
So we know from global research that having more diverse leadership and balanced leadership means that companies actually end up being more profitable and productive. So I think we've heard this from business leaders in the Pacific, that is their experience as well. They know their companies perform better with balanced leadership. So I think in terms of economic development in the Pacific, it's really important that all of our organizations and companies are able to perform to the best of their ability. And we know that having more women in leadership roles helps that.
In this report, there's been a slight increase of women's representation on boards in the Pacific. What would be some of the reasons for this trend?
Yeah, we're very pleased to see that between 2021 and 2024, the proportion of women as directors increased from 21% to 26%. And there was an even bigger increase for chief executive officers from 13 to 20%. There's a lot of reasons contributing to this increase. So I think we're seeing in the Pacific that women are increasingly well educated. They are graduating from university at higher rates. We know as well from our survey that women in the Pacific are very ambitious, and I think they're seeking these roles. But we also know that on the business side, there's actually valuing women in the workforce and valuing them in leadership. So we're seeing putting in place targets, 30% representation of women. They're putting in place policies that support women in the organisation, and this can be flexible work arrangements, helping with transport and issues around childcare. We also know that we're starting to see a change in attitudes about women's capability. So I think these are all contributing to increasing women in leadership in the Pacific.
You mentioned the benefits of having more women in business leadership in the Pacific, from a professional level, but what benefits does it bring to a community level or social level?
So I think, what we see is that when women and men, when everybody is able to realize their full potential, I think, they are happier in themselves and recognize the value of what they can contribute as an individual. And this may be in the workplace, but I think it's hard to separate yourself in the workplace to yourself in your home and your community. So I think those increases that we see in women's confidence and women's value that they see in themselves, plus some of the skills that they learn in a business environment, can equally translate to the home and to the community. And likewise, a common comment we heard in the interviews was women are already CEOs in their home, and that's why they perform well in leadership roles in business, because it's the same set of skills that are required to succeed in leadership, be it in your household or community or in a business environment.
Despite the increase of women sitting on boards, there are still persistent challenges. Can you explain what those barriers are?
Yeah, so we did a survey of around 285 women business leaders across the Pacific, and almost half of them reported that they experienced gender bias and discrimination in the workplace. So this could apply to recruitment and promotion practices. And we also know that there are issues around sexual harassment in the workplace and other things that just make the workplace a little bit more of a hostile environment for women than it perhaps is for men. And this can depend on the industry. Some of them where there are more men, more male-dominated industries, this tends to be a bigger problem. We do also know that one of the biggest barriers that women continue to face in the Pacific, and in fact in most countries around the world, is that they're still required to manage so much of the family and household responsibility. And we know that almost 60% of the women that responded to our survey indicated that despite the increase in their leadership role at work, they were still expected to maintain the same level of household and family responsibility. So this presents a significant challenge. And this is, of course, linked to cultural attitudes around responsibility of men and women and the different roles. And while women continue to play the key role in raising children and looking after the family, this will continue to be a challenge. But we are also seeing, encouragingly, more equitable roles between men and women in the household in terms of sharing those responsibilities. Particularly, we're seeing that come through with the younger generations.
That's Pacific Waves for today. To listen back, head over to rnz.co.nz/Pacific. We're also on Spotify, Apple and iHeartRadio. From myself and the RNZ Pacific team, tō whā, soifua.